As you all know, Dan has seen it all, and he's written lucidly and with stunning candor about California politics for 40 years. He's deeply respected as the dean of the Capitol Press Corps, and his work is published in more than 50 California newspapers. Dan doesn't just write about history, he often helps determine it. One of the causes he fights for California is the system of governance, or lack thereof. And today, he'll take questions after his presentation and challenge us to think boldly about what's possible for California. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Walters.
Seeing everyone out here, all the groups that are represented, kind of reminds me of the line from Casablanca about rounding up the usual suspects. Even Pete Golas went all the way from Santa Rosa to come here. It's amazing to me. Well, I'm one of those people that Jim referred to, and I think he's referring to himself as well, who came to California from somewhere else. Although in my case, it wasn't exactly voluntary, since I was only about 5 years old at the time. And my first stop of many stops in California was Imperial County, which should have been enough to make me turn around and go back to Kansas or wherever I came from, probably. But nevertheless, I was here, and I've lived all over this state, from as far south as El Centro and as far north as Eureka. And I've watched it evolve over time in both good and bad ways. And it kind of struck me as I spent time in the Capitol over the last, my God, 35 years, that things weren't working too well. And you know, everybody talks about the budget and the long delays in the budget, and maybe we need to do something about the two-thirds vote or that sort of thing. But truly, the problems of California, of governing California, extend way beyond the budget, as the film implied and as Jim told you earlier. There's not just the budget, and it's not something that can be fixed with just a small change like the two-thirds vote. The California indeed has a crisis of governance that crosses many specific issues. And the dynamics that prevent the legislature and the governor from putting together a state budget year after year, not only a state budget per se, but a state budget that makes any kind of sense, that meets the needs of, the legitimate needs of California, does so fairly and equitably, and is balanced, at least in the main, between income and outgo. The same dynamics that prevent that from occurring chronically in California are the same dynamics that stall other issues as well, and some of them were highlighted in the film. Water, education, transportation, healthcare, all issues that just kind of go on year after year after year after year. In fact, if you'd say the dominating trend of the Capitol over the last several decades has been nothing. Seriously, nothing. You know, there's a great deal of churn in the Capitol. I call it the churn. I don't know what other people might call it. But, you know, bills are introduced, news conferences are held, hearings are held, there's debates of a sort on the floors. They talk about this, they talk about this, they talk about this. But you add it up at the end of the year as to what was really accomplished during the year. Not the bills that deal with Mylar balloons and power lines, or, you know, spaying animals or stuff like that, but the real substantive work that this legislative process should be doing. And you add it up at the end of the year, usually it's pretty much nothing. And as Jim said, it's not because the people at the Capitol are bad people or somehow, well, there probably are a few bad and venal people, but nevertheless, it's really not that reason. There's something more structurally involved. And I'm going to illustrate that by asking, since this is interactive, I'm going to ask you a question. Does anyone in this room know who's in charge of public education in California? Seriously. Who's in charge? Who's responsible for the outcome? Is it the governor, the governor's education secretary, the legislature, the superintendent of public instruction, the state school board, the local superintendent, the county school board, or the county superintendent? Anybody know? I mean, if you don't like what's going on, who do you go to? And the answer, of course, is everyone's involved, all those plus other interests as well, the unions, parents, and whatnot. And because everyone has input, everyone has a piece of the action in education, no one is truly responsible for the outcome. No one is truly accountable for what occurs. We have, in other words, a great system for passing the buck. A wonderful system for passing the buck. If something good happens in education, which happens about every 20 years or so, then everybody's out there patting themselves on the back. When bad things happen, if we get a new set of test scores that says we're tied for last place with Washington, D.C. in fourth grade reading scores, or our dropout rate has gotten to some new and horrendous figure, who takes responsibility for that? No one. No, it's not me, it's the other guy. The governor blames the legislature blames the governor, everybody blames the school board, I don't know. But it goes on and on and on. We have a wonderful system for passing the buck. Or to paraphrase Harry Truman, the buck stops nowhere in California. Why? What's wrong? Why do we have that? Well, we can actually blame, I think, the founding fathers, people who founded this nation more than 200 years ago. Not that there was any malicious intent on their part. They created a structure of government that made sense for them at that time. A sparsely populated, agrarian nation in which only white male landowners could vote, that had just fought a revolution from a king, and therefore the Founding Fathers were very, very suspicious of authority. They didn't like authority. They didn't like the idea that somebody could make a decision and have that decision be law, like a king could. So they consciously, in much agonizing way, and with many compromises, created a structure of government that diffuses power, diffuses authority. We call them checks and balances. Two House legislature, the Senate was originally elected by state legislatures, you might recall. A president, but not elected popularly through electoral college. You've got to diffuse that power even more. A judiciary, and so forth. And then when we became a state in 1850, we adopted that same system as basically all other states did, except for Nebraska, which has a unicameral legislature. And then we, in our infinite wisdom, because I guess we were suspicious of power even more, added even more checks and balances to the system. Separately elected constitutional officers like the Attorney General and the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Eventually, things like the initiative, the referendum, the recall, the two-thirds vote on the state budget was added in the 1930s. Two-thirds vote on taxes added in the 1970s. We even created a new constitutional office not too long ago in the State Insurance Commissioner. We diffused authority even more. We made it even more difficult to make decisions. More hurdles, more checks and balances. Now that might have been okay, I guess, and probably that system works okay in South Dakota or another boring place like that, but doesn't work very well in California. Why? The Founding Fathers could have never envisioned California. I mean, think of it. We can't even envision California most of the time. They could have never envisioned a state as densely populated as this one is, with so many different ethnic groups and cultural persuasions, with an economy that has no true central focus that's diffused among dozens of particular industries. I mean, could they have envisioned a state in which marijuana was the #1 agricultural crop? No, I don't think so. A state of enormous geographical diversity, of diversity at all levels. In fact, I maintain, I believe, that California is the most complex and diverse society in the history of humankind. That there's never been a place like this place. Or as Dorothy told Toto in The Wizard of Oz, Toto, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. Well, this used to be kind of Kansas. And when it was kind of Kansas, our governmental structure worked fairly well, a half century or so ago. But as we evolved away from being Kansas and evolved into what is now California, that structure began to bog down. Why? Because this great diversity, this incredible diversity of all forms, not only creates either unique political issues or more intense versions of